Mags and Tom's Hardware. I'm here checking out the new Moto G, the 2015 or the third generation version of Motorola's budget or mid-range budget smartphone, and arguably one of the best mid-range phones you can currently buy. This is the US model that was recently announced in New York City, and this is the black one. This is one of the standard colors. The Moto G is available in black or white. You can see that the new model has more of a design language. It's a little bit closer to the Moto X, so it has that sort of curve back here, just like the Moto X style and play, the new models. There is this central bar below the camera. I was told that this is metal, but on investigation it just looks like to be a metal applique over the regular plastic construction of the rest of the phone. So around front here we have a 5-inch display, standard for the Moto G, so the screen size hasn't changed. So I will talk a little bit about what's new with the 2015 edition, because as I said, the screen hasn't changed in size, but there have been some other changes. So one important thing to note is that unlike last year's model that was available in a 3G and a 4G LTE model, there is now only an LTE model, which is a good thing to note. But there are different models that do support different bands, so they're not unlike the Moto X that has universal frequencies, so like 14 different LTE bands. With the Moto G, there will be still different models for different markets with different LTE frequencies. It is powered by a Snapdragon 410 SoC. That's a 1.4 gigahertz MSN 8916 SoC. It's a quad-core chip that uses Cortex A53 cores. So that's a step up from last year's model. Last year's model had a Snapdragon 400 1.2 gigahertz SoC. This one has an Adreno 306 GPU, so a slightly better GPU. This model we're looking at here is the one with 16 gigs of internal storage. There's also a micro SD card slot underneath here, and the 16 gigabyte model also has 2 gigabytes of RAM. The entry-level model has only 8 gigs of internal storage and 1 gig of RAM, and also, disappointingly, with the pre-installed apps and the Android OS, even though there's a minimal app install, the 8 gig model only has around 4 gigs of usable free storage for additional applications and music. So you're definitely going to have to get either a micro SD card for that model or upgrade to the 16 gig model. So it's hard to see here, but this model is slightly bigger than last year's model, only by a few millimeters. So like it's about a millimeter taller, a millimeter wider, and a millimeter thicker. So it's not a huge difference in size, and wouldn't really be noticeable unless you put the phones next to each other side by side. Another big change is, unlike last year's model that was splash resistant, the new Moto G is IPX7 water resistant. That means you can hold the phone underwater up to 1 meter water for 30 minutes. So that's a big improvement. And one interesting thing, just like some of the Samsung phones that had that feature, when you take off this back is removable, though I will say there's not a removable battery. The removable back is to change the color of it. It does remind you to put the back on again very tightly when you boot up the phone for the first time. Just to make sure that no water gets inside the device, which obviously would wreck it. So around back, another big improvement is the camera. On previous Motorola phones, both the Moto G and the Moto X, the cameras have often been their weak points, and Motorola has definitely addressed that. So we have here a 13 megapixel camera. It's the same camera sensor used by the Nexus 6. So that's a Sony Exmor RS IMX214, which is actually quite a good camera sensor. OnePlus also uses that sensor on their phone. It's not obviously going to have the same super high-end optics and laser autofocus and phase detection autofocus that a high-end flagship phone will have, but it's certainly a substantially better camera than what you find in a lot of lower-end smartphones. There's a dual LED flash, and there is a coating on the lens to help with lens flares and chromatic aberrations. Unlike the Moto X, that actually has a dedicated IR cut filter, it's just I was just told it was a coating on the lens. Still, f2.0 aperture, which is still pretty good, though obviously, again, not as good as some higher end phones. It shoots in HDR, so there's a big improvement on the camera. Last year's Moto G only had an 8 megapixel rear camera, which wasn't particularly good. I mean, not awful, but nothing to write home about. Around front, we have a 5 megapixel camera. So again, an improvement on the front-facing camera as well from last year's model. Last year's model only had a 2 megapixel front-facing camera. On the batteries front, the battery is slightly bigger this year. It's 2470 milliamp hours versus 2390, so only slightly bigger. The front of the phone has Gorilla Glass 3, which means it should be very scratch resistant. And it's nice that they're using Gorilla Glass, because some lower end phones don't even have scratch resistant finish on their scratch resistant glass. They just use a lower end plastic or cheap glass. So the Moto G does have a Gorilla Glass. So what hasn't changed? Obviously the 5-inch display. It's a 5-inch HD, so 720p display, which is to be expected from a phone in this price range. It's not an awful screen, though. I don't know if you can see here. Let me see if I can just maybe turn the brightness up a little bit. You know, the off-angle viewing is not the greatest. It's not, you know, terrible, but it's not amazing. And the maximum brightness is maybe not as bright as some other phones. But again, for most people, an average use, I'm sure they'd be quite happy with the screen. And it's running Android Lollipop 5.1.1. Which the current Moto G is now being updated to as well. There's also a micro SD slot, so the micro SD slot is underneath the back here, which I'll open up in a second. So those are the things that stayed the same between last year's model and this year's model. But along with the Android 5.1.1, which is basically a very default stock looking Android. It isn't stock Android. There's a few changes, such as the camera app and the gallery app have been changed to Motorola versions, but all the other applications and look and feel is exactly the same as stock Android. There are a few Motorola applications that will be installed on the phone. One is Moto Display, and one is Moto Assist. Moto Assist allows you to automate some functionality of the phone, and Moto Display, which I'll show you here. So if you pick up the phone, when it's sleeping, you see the time comes up on the screen. If you had any notifications, you'll see the notifications. So this allows you to quickly check notifications without having to unlock the phone. So I did mention earlier that the Moto G is now customizable, and it's the first Moto G to be able to be customized on Motorola's Moto Maker site. Moto Maker is not available in every market. So for example, right now, Moto Maker has been available in Mexico, US, France, Germany, and the UK. And with the launch of this new Moto G, Moto Maker is now available in Brazil too. And Brazil is one of the largest markets for this phone, so it makes sense that Motorola would bring that feature to the Brazilian market. So I'm just going to pop off the back here. As you can see, I hit the camera doing that. It's very tight in actual fact. It's not easy to remove. But because you're not expected to remove this very often for, let's say, a removable battery, they obviously make it nice and tight. So as you can see, I've taken off the back here. There's a SIM card slot, there's a micro SD slot, and the removable back. So when you go to Moto Maker, you can get this in different colors. There's 10 different colors available. This again is the Cabernet color. It's also available in lime, yellow. As I mentioned, there's the default black and white. There's raspberry, cherry, navy blue, turquoise, and a lighter blue. The accents can be customized as well, just like on the Moto X. So this metal plate here can be customized to a different color. And the metal accents are also available in 10 different colors. So there's lime, chrome, light chrome, red, champagne, purple, orange, blue, black, and pink. So there's a wide variety of customizable colors that you can get your Moto G in, which is nice. Of course, the default colors are white and black. This phone is not only going to be available on lot from Motorola, but there will be carriers, including prepaid carriers, that will carry it, and they will only have either the white or the black or both models. So let's get into pricing. It starts at $180, so that's a very reasonable price. $180 gets you the 8GB model with 1GB of storage, and that's in the US. The Moto G is coming to Canada, and the Canadian model is going to be the 8GB model, 1GB. Unfortunately, Canadians will not have access to the 16GB, 2GB of RAM model, and the Canadian model will be $200 for the 8GB model as well. The 16GB model with the 2GB of RAM, which you can order from Moto Maker, is a little bit more money. It's $220, but I definitely recommend getting the model with more storage and more RAM for the extra $40. It's going to be available in the US. The unlocked model supports LTE bands 2, 4, 5, 7, 12, and 17, so it should work on T-Mobile and AT&T. And then there's also going to be a prepaid model in the US available that has different LTE bands that support Sprint, US Cellular, Virgin Mobile. So there's two different models. I mentioned in Canada there's going to be one model, and it's going to be available from the Canadian carriers Bell, Kudu, Telus, Virgin Mobile, and Wind. So this has been a quick look at the new Moto G, which is available now. So it was launched the day of the event, so you can go to Motorola.com and you can order a Moto G right now in any customized color you want. And this is Alex and Tom's Hardware. Thanks for watching.